David was the product manager for CNN Go or CNN Travel. I can't remember if you were if you overlap both of those products or
Yeah, it was both of them, but mostly the Go era.
right. So the CNN Go kind of experiment. Um, but he's also the writer of the RandomWire blog. And I thought it was a really interesting you would be a really interesting guy to talk to because, like I say, you're kind of a technical guy. You're a product manager. You studied software engineering at university. So you would think that if you did a blog, you might do something kind of techy or something about product manager stuff. But actually, your blog is very, I mean, looking at it, it looks like a travel blog essentially. And at the same time, you're not a professional writer. At least it's not the sort of thing that you do for your day job. But it's obviously you can write. You write your blog. So I thought that was kind of an interesting. It's kind of a world away from what you do in your day job, basically, and it's kind of this nice little side thing you've got going on. So maybe start by telling us how did that come about? How did it start, and why did it start?
Yeah, so it's been over 20 years now since I started it, amazingly. It was actually I kind of things kicked off when I was actually at university. So this is back in like 2003. And yeah, like you said, I was studying software engineering and blogging was just starting to take off at that time. So that kind
Hmm.
of old school blogging. And so it did actually start from like a technical perspective. There was this new software called WordPress,
Hmm.
which was completely brand new at the time. And I just sort of started off by playing around with it. So actually in the very early days, if you go back to those original posts, it was actually kind of like technical stuff that I was learning at university almost daily.
Hmm.
Um, and I wasn't really doing it for anybody in terms of like an audience in mind. It was really just sort of me playing around, a bit of a hobby. Um, but once I finished university, started working, it sort of slowly started to transform. I would sort of write quite a lot about my interests in sort of like design and some tech stuff. But over the years, it sort of started to move more towards travel, and I think the sort of trigger for that was moving to China. So I moved to Beijing in 2007 on a work project. And as somebody who was, well, I was probably only, what, 22 at the time, that was just like a mind-blowing, life-changing experience for me.
Hmm.
Um, I'd never been somewhere quite as, um, let's just say, exotic as that. And that totally transformed, my life and then ultimately the blog as well. So I started to get a bit of traction in terms of kind of people reading and commenting, and that sort of just fed into me wanting to keep it going. So it slowly sort of transformed more into like life in Asia, interesting places I'd seen. I started doing a bit more photography.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah, I
and
should say
so
your blog is full of really nice photos as well. I mean, your posts kind of you end up strolling quite a long way, but there's not much writing to read. There's a lot of
yeah,
photo essay style kind of posts that you do, aren't there?
exactly. So like you said earlier, like I'm not a writer, I'm not a photographer. This is really sort of a hobby for me, a bit of an escape from what I do every day, which is yeah, completely different. Um, and so yeah, there's just sort of an enjoyment, mostly just for myself in terms of keeping this kind of quite visual diary online. But then I really love it when I get comments or emails from people. Um, you know, sometimes there are places I go which are pretty offbeat, and so people will kind of then get in touch asking me like, how did you get here? Logistical things, which I find quite fun as well.
Mm.
So yeah, I think I never expected it to continue this long, but I'm kind of glad it has.
And
And I
did I see? I remember I couldn't find it now, but I think I saw somewhere when I initially contacted you a couple of weeks ago that you get about 100,000 visitors a month.
Oh, that might not have been me.
All right.
It's certainly it's not. You know what? I couldn't actually tell you exactly how many visitors I get. It's probably not as high as that. There are
That sounds very
certainly,
high, doesn't it? But I mean,
yeah,
even if it's even in that kind of ballpark, that's like it's a very good audience you've got there if they're coming to you for your random musings on random topics.
yeah. I think there are certainly hundreds of people who've subscribed by email.
Right.
Um, And then I think most of the traffic though is just sort of organic, people
Mm,
finding things through Google. Um, Sometimes like there'll be a post which somehow kind of like piques people's imagination and it will kind of just continually pop up on Reddit or other
mm,
places like that. Um, and so yeah, it's just become this like big library of mostly places, but then there's also some stuff about like Japanese design that's quite
hmm.
popular as well. Um,
And
but yeah,
do you monetize it at all? I noticed there are no ads on there, but so
no,
you haven't gone down that route at all then.
I don't make a penny from it. In fact, it costs me money because obviously I have to
Mm,
pay for the server hosting. Um, and so yeah, every month it's actually costing me money. I've kind of like I've always felt that given it's my hobby, if I started putting ads on it, I feel like that would take away from it somehow.
hmm.
Um, and I don't know. I don't really look at the industry as a whole, but my understanding is that there's not a huge amount of money to be made in 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 travel blogging these days. So
I
um,
think it depends who you ask. I mean, it certainly seems to be getting trickier if you're going down the kind of the SEO route.
yeah,
So do you do any SEO on any of your posts or anything like that, or it's just literally just kind of what comes out of your head goes onto the page?
it's literally just that.
Right.
I do some basically things like writing a different title tag than the page heading, right?
Uh-huh.
But that's probably the extent to which I've tried to
Right.
optimize anything.
Uh-huh.
It's purely just for the love of it, to be honest.
Hmm.
And yeah, an escape from the sort of daily stuff, and also just to share things with people that are a little bit off the beaten track, if that's not a cliche.
Mm,
Um, there are so many travel blogs about travel blogs about Japan in particular, but
mm,
they all cover the same places. Um, and so the things that really interest me are places that are, seldom visited, or a little bit quirky in some way. And especially in the last kind of 5, 10 years, I've done a lot of pilgrimage trail hiking. That's something I got really interested in Japan. And it just turns out that there are dozens, if not hundreds, of these ancient pilgrim trails all over the country, and there are a few that are really well known, like the Shikoku pilgrimage and the Kumano Kodo. But then, those have become quite popular in recent years. But then there are all the others out there, and
mm.
so I've written about a few of them, and I would just get tons of interest in those articles because nobody else has written anything about them.
Yeah.
Um, Same in
Especially in English, maybe. I mean, there's probably quite a few
exactly,
now, but when you were doing this 10, 15 years ago, I guess there weren't too many English bloggers anyway
yeah,
doing that sort of stuff.
yeah. Same thing for China. I mean, China has actually become less accessible to travelers in probably the last 10 years, weirdly enough. And so, yeah, again, there's kind of rich pickings in terms of, as soon as you go outside of Shanghai or Beijing or Hong Kong, like people just don't go to these places on holiday.
Mm.
Um, yeah, I think um, it's just, yeah,
Well,
endless amount of
let's
stuff to discover
let.
there.
I wanted to pick up on your the Shikoku pilgrimage because that
Yeah.
was a huge. That was like a 1,400 kilometer trek
Yes.
over 52 days. I noticed in your
Yep.
and you wrote kind of a journal about this as you went on this, and you had a book published as a result of that single kind of journey as well.
Yes.
Was that like a collection of your blog posts?
So that was mostly actually a collection of photos. So that was
Right.
a photo book. Um, I did sell that for money, but I made no money from it. So it's all of these things have just been really, again, a labor of love. But that during that pilgrimage, I was writing the blog every day. So it was basically at the
On
end of
on
the
a
day,
laptop? Like,
it
did
was
you have
actually on an
Wi-Fi?
iPad. Um,
Okay.
iPad connected to my phone
Right.
wirelessly. And I would sit in my tent or my accommodation at the end of the day and probably spend 2, 3 hours just bashing out the daily update. But that was hugely popular. I think in part because I had posted on a Facebook group at the very beginning, and there are lots of people in there who are like planning their own pilgrimages, and so
Mm.
they were following day by day. I even had people give me tips. At one point, somebody actually local in Shikoku sought me out on the trail, and actually walked with me for a day, which was just fantastic.
Mm.
So kind of like, yeah, being able to make those connections, and then having something physical at the end of it, the photo book, which people could get, was really rewarding. Um, I was also kind of between jobs at that time as well, so I did have a bit more
Mm.
time on my hands.
Were you kind of
Um,
going through a bit of a questioning midlife stage, and this kind of
yes,
pilgrimage was
yes,
meant to kind of help sort that out, kind of thing?
very much so. I had completely
Right.
burnt out on a job in
Hmm.
Tokyo. And it was just a situation where I didn't want to just jump into a new job. That wouldn't have helped. I just needed a complete disconnect. Um, and so that sort of 2+ months of just walking every day, writing a journal at the end of the day, taking lots of photos, meeting people was really the perfect way of like detoxing
Mm.
all of the kind of negative stuff that had built up, um, and was really helpful. I often kind of recommend it to people who are maybe in some sort of other similar situation where they're sort of questioning their life direction.
Hmm.
And it doesn't have to be Japan. There are plenty of these types of walks all around the world. Um, in fact, I'm even planning on doing one this summer in France. So
Mm.
I don't know if I'm going to do a daily vlog, but I might try and do it sort of, a couple of times a week. Um, I think that would be fun. Um,
But
but
it
yeah, I
sounds so.
think
It sounds like your blog, without the pressures of traffic and monetization and all that sort of thing, it's just kind of there for you to use and add to as and when you see fit or when you fancy it, basically. So is that
exactly.
kind of how you treat it? You don't put any pressure on yourself to update every
Yeah,
day or every week. So talk us
no.
maybe through your blogging process and workflow, and what kind of story qualifies to become a
Yeah.
blog post and that sort of thing.
So I think, yeah, you're right. There's no pressure, there's no schedule. What I do have though is kind of like, I wouldn't call it an editorial calendar. There's nothing that grand,
Hmm.
but it would be basically a list of things I want to write about. Um, Mostly these are places that I've been. I think what qualifies them in terms of like if I would write about them or not would be, is there something interesting here that is um, number one, is it visually interesting?
Mm.
Or is there some sort of historical aspect that makes it interesting? Um, and is it something that I'm writing about that is in some way unique and not overly exposed, right? I'm not
Hmm.
going to write about the top 10 temples in Kyoto, for example.
Hmm.
Like you can you can find 100 other articles about that. So if it meets those sort of like basic things, then yeah, I'll add it to the list, and then I'll typically, once I get back from a trip, I will edit the photos at my own pace, and then I'll start doing just research to kind of, actually it's quite rewarding in that sense. Like I don't do a lot of research before I go somewhere. I like to experience it like in the moment, and have a chance for sort of some sort of serendipity as I'm on the road.
Hmm.
But then, yeah, when I get back, I'll just read up about where it is I went, what's the history, um, and then start putting something together. And then, you know, I'll if it's a multi-piece, like if it's something that has multiple articles, I will actually write them all up in one go. I will then go through and edit them, check that what I'm writing is accurate, and then I will sort of publish them maybe once a day, once a week, and
Hmm.
feed them out, um, and just do it like that. I used to be quite active on sort of Instagram, Twitter, things like that, but to be honest, I kind of like gave up on that, and
Mm.
so really, this is like the most minimal blogging um,
The lazy
setup
man's
you could
blogging
imagine.
kind of thing. Yeah.
Exactly, exactly.
Yeah.
Because I think if I was tracing traffic or ad dollars, or I was trying to do deals with, I don't know, vacation properties or whatever, like that would just take all
Mm.
the joy out of it for me. So
Hmm.
um,
Because I mean, and I
yeah,
noticed that you had quite a big gap last year where you didn't post for several
yes,
months. When I don't know you were
yes,
moving country or something. I mean, did that
yes.
again? Was that did you look at the traffic to see if that affected anything, or was that just oh this is just what's happening? I'm not going to worry about it. I'll post again when I want to, kind of thing.
I, I didn't worry about it. It was pretty much, yeah. Like I moved from Japan to Germany, and it was there was just a huge amount going on
Hmm.
to get settled in. And to be honest, like I had, because most of my writing was focused on Asia, I kind of was feeling a little bit like, okay, how does Germany
Mm.
fit into this?
Mm.
Um, I'm still figuring that out, but yeah, no, it was no stress. I did actually get a few people who emailed me and were asking like, where have you gone?
Mm.
That was sweet.
Mm.
And again, no, this year I'm getting back into the swing of it. I've just been away for 2.5 weeks in both Japan and China, so I've got
Plenty
plenty
of
of
fodder.
material now in the bank. Yeah,
Mm.
so I'm probably going to drip that out over the next few months.
But it is tricky, isn't it? Because I noticed you put a post up. Your most recent post is about Munich. And
Yep.
so one of my questions was going to be like, yeah, what are you thinking about the Asia angle versus the European angle? Again, it might not
Yeah.
matter. It might just be this is where you are. So this is what you're documenting and observing. But you're
Yeah,
still going to try and do a lot of Asian stuff, it sounds like as well, then.
I think so. I think it will become periodic in terms of I'll probably go back to Asia at least once a year,
Mm,
um, both for personal and work stuff, because my work is still heavily connected to China. Um, and so I'll probably do a whole bunch of trips, specific, you know, while I'm out there, and then I will bank that up and then drip it out through the year. But I think whilst I'm in Germany, I'm also very much into a whole bunch of outdoorsy stuff, so hiking and climbing. So I want to focus a bit more on that. And
mm,
I mean, the main reason I moved to Munich was for that side of things.
okay.
Um,
It
I
might be
think there's
more
a lot
difficult to find those lesser written
offbeat.
about
Yeah,
offbeat
yes,
places in Europe than in Asia, I
definitely,
imagine. But
definitely,
give it a go.
definitely. We'll see, we'll see. I think it's really whatever captures my interest. I think though my audience is primarily looking, I think, you know, interested in that Asia stuff. So I mean, I suspect it will still stay predominantly that.
Hmm. And so, are those the posts that you enjoy the most? Is kind of exploring the lesser known Asian spots and just
Yeah,
kind of revealing something that maybe you hadn't been to before, other readers might not have been to before.
exactly, exactly. And also sort of like, yeah, both the places, the history, the architecture is yeah, just completely captivating to me.
Hmm.
Um, Europe, yeah, like you said, it's different. I haven't found my way into that yet in terms of writing, but we'll see.
Mhm. How long have you been in Munich now? Is it a
It's a
year?
year exactly, yeah.
Right. Okay.
Um, and yeah, completely different vibes to where we were before,
Yeah.
in Japan.
I was in
Um,
Hamburg last year, which was an amazing city. I loved Hamburg. Hadn't been to Munich though. Um, Isn't Jane Leung in Berlin as well these days? You should do a little
Yes, I
CNN
should.
meetup.
We should absolutely.
Yeah.
Um,
Okay.
yeah, no.
Cool. But tell us, like, you've mentioned there how it's kind of it's basically a travel themed post that
Hmm.
you like to do. But you've also talked about kind of design, a bit of techie stuff as well.
Yeah.
How does your background kind of influence this stuff, or is it all just very observational as you're traveling through a place? I mean, what kind of design stuff do you include and like to write
Yeah.
about?
So I did a series of posts a few years ago on, I think it was like something called like user experience in Japan, which was kind
Mm,
of just like actually looking at um, the kind of everyday interactions that you have with technology, should we say, or designed objects and how that differed to other places. To give you one example, when you enter a train station in Japan, you have to swipe to go through the gates, but by default, the gates are open, right?
hmm
This just shows a completely different mindset to what you might expect in London, for example,
mm,
where everything's closed by default and there's like the gates are there to really sort of obstruct you
mm,
and stop you from cheating the system. Whereas in Japan, I think there's more of a cultural norm towards people doing the right thing, shall we say?
mm.
And so, sort of, how do these cultural and societal things manifest themselves in our everyday kind of like lives? And so, yeah, I always try to look for things like that where maybe there's something there that I can bring because of my background in both
And
kind of tech and
comparisons,
design.
yeah, that's really
Yeah.
interesting. Yeah. Is there a post? I mean, obviously, kind of. I imagine that your pilgrimage journal is probably the biggest piece of work, if you like, that you've done
Yeah.
on your blog. Is there one that you're like particularly proud of? I imagine it might be that one because just because of the extent of it and that it resulted in a very nice book and that sort of thing.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest thing I've done
Hmm
today. I think there are also a few other things, other articles that have been just massively popular over the years. The other one was called Why Japanese Web Design is So Different.
Ah.
This has actually probably been the biggest trafficked post I've ever written.
Hmm.
Um, I think, and I think, again, just a caveat, this was posted almost 10 years ago, so it's things have changed a little bit since I first wrote
Hmm.
it, but I think people who like traveled or even worked in Japan would quickly notice that, the way the internet works there is quite different
Hmm.
from shall we say the Western world. Um, and the way in which the web pages are laid out, how you interact with them is like yeah, very, very different. And I
But
kind
that's
of
not
wrote this
a
post.
that wasn't a technical article, I presume. That was kind of
No,
written for the layman to be able to understand and
yes.
enjoy as well.
And I kind of just listed out what I felt were kind of some of the cultural reasons why it had ended up like this.
Mm.
Basically, kind of having done a bunch of research into what other people had written. So this is not this is again layman
It's
doing
almost
this, but
journalism, David,
yeah,
when you're doing
yeah,
research.
yes, yes. But it just did
Almost.
incredible well, and it pops up. It gets reposted in various places again and again and again.
Mm.
So that's just been the most popular thing I've ever written. And I would like to have been able to pull that off again.
Mm.
I haven't so far.
But
But I
again,
I do.
you don't go into like people will often say you need to update old posts for Google to kind of recrawl and all this sort of stuff. You don't do any of that though. No.
No, I do make sure that occasionally I'll fix links that are dead, but I don't
Hmm
spend a lot of time on that. Um, I think the other posts that I'm sort of most proud of again are like these kind of like long expeditions that I break up into multiple parts. Um, there was another one in Japan called the Omine Okugake, which again is probably the most hardcore pilgrimage trail in Japan,
hmm
because it's basically 10 days, extremely remote, so you're not seeing people for days at a time. You can't really you can't really, if you want to quit halfway through, you either kind of have to walk to the end or back to the beginning. So there's no kind of
Hmm.
like really easy way out. Um, so that was quite exciting in terms of both doing it, but then also writing about it. And then it's something that not many people do. So um, that one I'm also quite proud of. And I think is probably one of very few um, article in English that have been written about that particular trail.
Mm.
Um, and so that also generated quite a lot of interest.
Yeah.
Um,
And do you kind of consider style or your writing style as you write? I mean, how much of your
yeah,
writing is a kind of a conscious effort, and how much of it is it just puking onto a page, that kind of thing?
I would say my writing style is quite functional.
Hmm.
Um, I know some people sort of try to write in. Again, I'm not a writer, so I don't want to like offend anybody else out there
Uh-huh.
who is, but sort of like people who try to write things in a very, I don't know, flowery way in terms of the describing. I tend to be quite functional in describing the place I visited, how you get there, but then also try to inject a little bit of kind of how it made me feel whilst I was doing it, what it meant to me personally.
Mm.
Um, but at the end of the day, no, I don't have a style guide. Grammar is checked with Grammarly. Um, it's I think
But it's not only kind of that what we call service information. It's not just
yeah,
how to go and
no,
do this yourself. There's a bit of extra there
no,
as well, isn't there?
definitely.
Hmm.
Definitely. But I think I would call my writing style pretty sparse. I try
Uh-huh.
I try to let the images tell the story
Hmm.
um as much as possible. Um
And you never try to
um
be, I mean, you don't try to be controversial or provocative,
no, no.
in any
I,
cases, do you?
honestly, like I found that just like causes more stress. Like
Hmm.
I don't want to be dealing with trolls. People can comment on the site and they do, but if people write something that I don't feel is like productive or I just won't approve it. So it's
Hmm. So you
I,
moderate all
I
that stuff.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Hmm.
I have no interest in trying to generate clicks through controversy. Like that's just not me.
Hmm.
Um, again, I'm not trying to be a journalist. This is it's more of a diary than anything else. If I do have a bad experience, I will touch on it. But again, I try to be just really conscious that uh, you know I'm, I'm a privileged person traveling through these
Hmm.
places, and my perspective is not necessarily always very helpful. So, you know, I don't want to be treading on people's toes in that way.
Sure.
Um, I think something else I'll mention is like sometimes I also feel the responsibility of like I don't want to lead people into a situation which is going to be dangerous for them. In terms of again, some of these like that trail I was just talking about just now, like you don't want to be falsely representing something as being like this is something you can just pack a bag and wander out the
Mm.
door and do. So I take that responsibility with some seriousness and try
In
to
what way? Is explaining it in the post what you need to do to do this yourself, you mean, or only selecting
put
subjects?
both. So
Right.
there's some things that I might avoid, but then there are also I would flag warnings up. So, for example, that one I mentioned just now, the Omine, there have been multiple people killed by bear attacks, right?
Oh God.
So,
Right.
um, so it's like I just try and like make that really clear so that if anybody's thinking about doing it themselves, sure, go and like you can go and have an adventure as well, but just kind of like be careful and
Mm.
don't blindly follow some travel blogger.
Sure. Not too many bear attacks around Munich, I imagine. So you'll be
No,
on safer ground, safer ground there. Brilliant. All right, David, thank you very much. I mean, I guess so. Just for anybody else, again, it's randomwire.com, isn't it? I did
Yes,
read on your blog now, you kind of explain where that name comes from, which is some kind of Chinese idiom or something, is it? Or
it is. And I need to go and look up what I wrote right now.
right.
It means
Yeah.
it means the Chinese translation of random wire means to speak or act with a well-defined objective in mind. Uh, so
Right.
you
And
can take that for what it is.
but one thing that occurs actually, you don't speak much Chinese, do you?
Not a lot, no, no.
Do you speak any Japanese?
Enough to get by, but
Right,
again,
but you're not kind of fluent in these languages, but you're able to kind
no,
of write about them and conduct this
yeah,
blog over the last 20 years as a foreigner, I guess, in these places,
yes,
without any trouble. So that's kind of good to know as well.
yeah. I think if you're open to sort of these sort of experiences, and you've learned enough to be able to say a few things that are going to help you get by and not upset anybody, then and again, like you're sensitive whilst you're going to these places and you're meeting people, but yeah,
Mm.
you'd be fine.
Brilliant, David. Thanks very much for your time today. I'm going to go and quickly sign up to your email as well because I don't think I'm on it yet. So anticipate many new blog posts. And yeah, it sounded like you had an interesting trip around Japan as well, doing another pilgrimage, I think, right? And one of these trails. Did you manage to get onto that this time?
So yeah, we did a cycling trail for a couple of
Cycling, that's
days.
it.
So yeah, I'm gonna be writing about that soon.
Great.
And then yeah,
Look forward to it. Thanks a lot, David.
thanks,
Take
James. It was
care.
good to catch
Okay.
up.
You too.
Okay, bye
Bye
bye.
bye.